It was just the most massive thing I've ever seen. To tell you the honest truth, I thought, well, we're the only ones left on this planet. Something's happened. We've missed something here.
The fear that went in me when I seen it was just, like the feeling, I'd say it was fear, but I've never felt that feeling before in my entire life.
It's a weird feeling, like you can't explain it when you don't know. You feel like you're being followed, but you don't know what it is.
We had two to our right, another one in front of us, another one to the left, and another one just across the road, shaking the daylight out of the tree. All we get was a big red eye.
I remember waking up and looking at the end of the bed, and there was a figure there, almost insect-like, and then I blacked out.
Welcome to the show, everyone. My name is Kade, and you are listening to the Believe Paranormal and UFO podcast. If you have had an encounter and would like to share it, please get in touch with me. My email address is believepod@gmail.com. If you enjoy the podcast, be sure to leave us a rating or review wherever you listen, and head on over to our website, believepod.com, and consider becoming a member to get bonus episodes and video content.
Tonight I'm joined by John, and John lived on the southern part of New South Wales, and he was farming in the Riverina area. So John, welcome to the show, mate.
Thanks, Kade. It's a pleasure. The area is the Riverina, so it's sort of the central southern part of New South Wales. It goes down to the Murray River to the Victorian border.
I think I mispronounced it. I said Riviera, didn't I?
Yeah, you did.
Well, mate, thank you for correcting me on that one, because it is a beautiful part of Australia. But, mate, the thing that makes that area so unique for tonight's conversation is that it was a rather unique hotspot for you for a couple of years.
Yeah, we were in the area. We're not there now. We're down in southern Victoria, but we were there for sort of 30 years, Kade. So around, from Berrigan, Finley up to Narandra, so in that part, and then across towards Griffith. So in that area for 30 years. But there was a period from 95 to 99 where we had some incidences that we've never forgotten. And they left an indelible mark on our minds because it was pretty much unexplainable, really.
Yeah, and one thing that I really appreciate about you coming on the show here, John, is that you are a true blue farmer. And before I hit record here, I was saying to you that there's two people that I find really interesting in the world of the unknown, and one is farmers and one is truck drivers, because you're both kind of the salt of the earth type of people, and everything you do it's so critical and it's so important that everything that happens in your day-to-day life is critical for the farm to continue running. Like, there's no real downtime, no nonsense. And when something unusual happens and a farmer comes forward to talk about it, that's a really important thing to take notice of.
Yeah, we spent an awful lot of time with the particular farming that I was doing, which was predominantly rice. So over the period from maybe September, sowing in October, through to late February, March, and then harvesting April, May, for that period of time, you're out a lot at night, and you're out doing your job, so you're always in a hurry. You're always trying to get back to the house and have tea, or get back to the house and have some sleep. But there's always, you're out there for a task, and you never know how long you're going to be out there, because you may go out at 8 o'clock at night and think that you're going to go and check some water and see how pumps are going, and then invariably something will be wrong. There'll be water escaping, or there'll be a problem, and you could be out till 1 o'clock in the morning fixing it, or even longer. So two instances that we have no explanation for, and one was with my brother and the other was with a family friend. Would you like me to discuss those now?
Yeah, absolutely. It's these encounters, they're extremely mind-blowing from what I've read on the emails that you sent through. So if we can go through the one with your brother first, that would be excellent.
So we were preparing ground for the 95 to 96 rice season that was in sort of late August, September. My brother was to the west of where we were living by about 40 to 50 minutes. He was scarifying a paddock, and the tractor he was on was a case 4496. When he needed to give us a call or anything, he'd stop and jump out of the cab and stand on one of the front wheels to get good phone service and let us know how he was going. I don't know the exact date, but I know that it was early September. He was out to the west on a large, well-known 65,000 acre property, of which I was using a small fraction on a lease basis, so it wasn't my property. I was just leasing some country there. Anyway, Brett was out there on the tractor, and he rang us at about 10 o'clock at night in a bit of a state. He wasn't panicking, but he said, could you jump in the ute and come over to the paddock? And I said, mate, even if I'm in a hurry, it's still 3/4 of an hour away. What's the problem? He said, well, something's landed in the paddock. And I said, how do you mean landed in the paddock? Is it a helicopter or someone? He said, no, it's an object. And I said, well, how far away? And he said, probably a couple of 100 metres, that's all. And he was standing he'd switched the tractor off, and he was standing on one of the front wheels and talking on his phone. And I thought he was pulling my leg, but then, instantly, just listening to the tone of his voice, you could tell that he wasn't, and he was most concerned, and he was pretty insistent that I come over. And I said, well, by the time I get out and get going, it's most unlikely that it's still going to be there, but tell us what it is. And so we were on the phone for probably 10 minutes, and he was describing a circular object. He said that it had rotating lights just up from the bottom, so he couldn't, it was pitch black, of course, the night was a dark night, but he could see rotating lights up from the ground, so not on the ground and not at the top of it. And they were slowly rotating, and it was making no noise at all. He had the tractor turned off, and he's just standing there, relaying to me what it was doing. He told me where it was in the paddock. He could make out an outline. He said it wasn't so much a typical saucer shape, it was higher in the middle and not as wide on the perimeter. But the lights didn't stop, they just continued in a slow rotation. And I thought maybe I should jump in the car. And anyway, he said, hang on a second, and the phone went quiet. And he said, it's actually lifting. I said, is it making any noise? He said, no, there's no noise. He said, it's dead silent, no noise. And he said it lifted, and then he's describing it. I was actually worried for my brother. I'm thinking, if it's what I think it is, I mean, he's sort of pretty close to it, by himself in the middle of a large paddock. Anyway, it lifted, and then it shot off at a tangent. He said it just went. He could still see it into the distance, so it didn't just disappear, and it headed towards the... Then next morning, actually, I was on the tractor, and there was reports come in on 2QN, which was the Pinnacle radio, about people seeing a light in the sky, and they were ringing the radio station describing what they saw, but it was a lot higher, and they didn't have the description that I'd been told, but that was the encounter, and I have no idea.
That is truly mind-blowing. It has to be one of the most spectacular close encounters I've ever heard.
Yeah, it was. I would like to have been there, but it just wasn't. I mean, by the time it was too far away, to go and have a look. But Brett was quite eloquent in the way he described it, and he was quite calm. He was surprised, but he wasn't overly, he wasn't overexcited and, raised voice or anything. He was just describing it as he saw it. And so the lack of noise was pretty telling, and the fact that it basically sat down in the paddock. I'm not sure when he first saw it. I think he was travelling away from where it ended up being, and then he turned the tractor around on the headland and was coming back, and then he saw it because the dust, it's wet dust that you're dealing with, and that time of the year you can get a bit of dust following the scarifier, and I think he basically was watching his marks because there was no GPS guidance for the tractors in those days. Well, we certainly didn't have it. And then he said it just basically saw a light, and then the dust cleared and it was sitting there.
It's amazing to think that this whole thing could have come down without him noticing at all. And if he didn't turn around, he wouldn't have seen it.
Yeah, pretty much. The way he was working the paddock was backwards and forwards, so I think it must have come down while he was travelling in the other direction, and when he got to the end of that run and turned around and came back again, he was actually looking at it. So it's sort of come down behind him, as it were. You've got the lights on the tractor going forward, and you've got some spreader lights on the side, and as you've got some work lights on the back, and you're kicking up dust and listening to the radio and listening to the engine, you become a little bit fixated with your job. And he's turned around, he's come back, and it was sitting in the paddock. And then when the dust settled and they turned the engine off, and of course rang me, he had quite a time to stand there and observe it.
How big was this craft? Did he give you a size estimation?
Yeah, he likened it to a field silo. So in the intervening years, field silos and mother bins have got enormous, but back in those days, a 25 or 30-tonne silo was about the size that he said. So you'd be looking at sort of 16 or 18 foot in diameter, probably 16 foot in diameter, and maybe about the same height, maybe 20 foot high, something like that.
Oh, wow. So this thing actually had a bit of size to it.
Yeah, he said it wasn't quite as big as a silo. So we're talking about ones that have got wheels on them, and you tow them behind a ute. So not a receivable point. We're talking about just a paddock bin, if you like. Yeah.
So when your brother's telling you that he's seeing this all basically in real time, what's kind of going through your mind? Like, are you thinking this is like some random tractor that's come onto the field, or someone's driven their ute or whatever out into your paddock?
No, I sort of had a pretty good idea, because it's been a bit of an interest of mine, anecdotally, through the family. I mean, I've got a great uncle who was the owner of the plane that Valentich disappeared in, and so there was always that discussion on what Valentich, and you guys did a tremendous podcast follow-up on that I've listened to. Whilst I hadn't had any personal experience up until that time with my brother, it was something that certainly wasn't outside the realm of possibility as far as I was concerned. And when he described it sitting there and it was dead quiet, and particularly when it lifted off and it was dead quiet, kind of rules out about anything you can think of.
Oh, absolutely. Back in 1995, UFO subculture wasn't as popular as it was today. The fact that you've got that family connection to the Valentich case with the Cessna plane being owned by your great uncle, I think that is just mind-blowing in itself. Obviously, with that whole case being so closely related to you personally, there would have been this kind of desire to look into the whole UFO phenomenon even back then. And the fact that you were kind of making these assumptions and piecing things together that this may be what it is rather groundbreaking for that time.
Yeah, I suppose so. We didn't discuss it widely, so when I say we didn't discuss it, well, I certainly discussed it with my brother and within the family. It was a bit of a talking point, but as far as our friends and other relations go, I don't think we consciously didn't discuss it, but it was something we did keep to ourselves. We just sort of thought, well, there you go, and we just left it at that. We did have it in 1999, 2000, so that was a bit later in the year though, so that would have been about late October, an incident on our own place, which was just out in Narandra, with some dear friends of the family that had come up to help us look after some rice at night with regard to the ducks. And that was a pretty frightening experience for them. That was this one with Brett back in 95 got back on the tractor and kept working, but he didn't put in a long night.
Don't blame him.
I've had enough of it. But the other incident, created a bit of a stir with some friends of ours, that's for sure.
Yeah, right. So your brother kind of just carried on with the job and, like you said, didn't stick around too much longer, but almost seemed rather unfazed by this outer world kind of experience that he just had. Like, where does that kind of sit in his world? Like, did he ever kind of dive down any rabbit holes or anything like that.
And now, a quick word from our sponsor. Also, are you wanting more content? Why not become a Believe Plus member? You'll get access to exclusive podcasts and episodes that aren't available to the public. Not only that, you'll also get our regular feed without any ads. Head to believepod.com/plus to sign up today for just $5 a month.
Yeah, it is. He has always, his story has never wavered. So even talking about it, if we were talking about it with Brett tonight, the description, how it unfolded, has never changed. But he hasn't ruminated on it to any degree. He was, I suppose, relieved a little bit that there was other people on the radio the next morning that were talking about it. So it validated the fact that he wasn't suffering from tiredness and imagining things. So the fact that there was people talking about it gave him a bit of comfort. Oh yeah, they saw it as well. But no, he's carried it all this time. So, and he still works with the family. We still work doing a different thing altogether, but we still work within the family. So the story hasn't changed, Kade. It is what transpired all those years ago. Now, for a lot of people, it'd be a life-altering experience. For my brother, it hasn't really, you wouldn't say that it's altered his life, but it's certainly a topic of conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real ripper of a tale, and I tell you what, it's something I would be rather envious of, that type of encounter. The fact that he was just so cool, calm, collected about it, and was able to basically transcribe everything that was happening in real time to you is a real testament to him, because I think a lot of people's minds break in situations like this. They're seeing something that isn't supposed to be real. You're seeing a potential spaceship, things that are breaking the rules of gravity, the laws of physics.
Yeah, the only thing he was cross about was the fact that I wasn't jumping in the ute and driving straight over to have a look.
Do you wish
it's a 40-minute trip, and the ute that I had was an old diesel 2.8 litre Hilux, which were never that quick, and so the 40 minutes was going to be the 40 minutes. It was not going to be a 20 or 30-minute trip. It was going to be that length of time. I just thought, well, the chances of it just sitting in the paddock for that period of time, I would have loved to have gone over, but I knew that it wouldn't be there. And so, I just had to. And rather than, we had pretty poor phone reception, going over this, I sort of felt better staying on the phone and making sure he was okay, rather than jumping in the ute, driving over there, finding that the object's not there and he's not there either. It was probably a better decision just to keep talking to him and wait and see how it unfolded. And then the fact that he took off and got back in the tractor, it was a bit of a relief. He's my younger brother, so it was a relief from my point of view that all's well. But to do a mad dash over there was not probably going to be a sensible thing to do.
No, of course not. It sounds like level heads prevailed in that situation. And, hats off to you to kind of keep that level head in a situation like that, because I know if it was me, I'd be pedal to the metal and trying to get down there like there was no tomorrow.
Yeah, no, it was incredible. I said to him a number of times, has it moved? No, it's sitting in the same position. Has it just gone up or down or sideways? No, it's still sitting there. Because I was trying to think of things that could create that, whether it was light being reflected off an object or what it could possibly be. But I knew that area really well, and there was just nothing there. So it wasn't like there was objects behind that light could be hitting it from another source and being reflected back or anything like that. There's nothing there but timber. It was open paddocks and timber. There was nothing that could create the light source, and he described it as just basically sitting there, the only movement being the rotating lights. I think the lights, he was saying that there was reds, blues, orange and yellow, but I'm not going to swear on a Bible that was the exact colours, but there was a multitude of lights and they were just rotating at a slow pace.
Well, mate, I am interested about this other encounter that happened on your property. Are you able to tell me what happened to them? Because from what you were saying there earlier, it really rattled them.
Yeah, it did. So we with rice, once it's sown, you've got a period of time until it's established where the ducks predate upon it and can make a hiccup. You can end up with no crop. You'll end up with basic mud if you don't try and keep the ducks off it. It's mainly being there and making a noise. You're never going to make much of a dent in the population of ducks, but being out there and noise can mean the difference between getting a crop and not having a crop. It was always well received to have people come up, and you could have an early night, or you could go and sit down and have tea and watch TV without having to be out there yourself. And so it was welcome to have some people turn up and give you a hand. But there's a couple of blokes that we used to have nearly every year. One of them is a friend of my father's, and my father's passed away, but the gentleman in question is now in his 80s, and I only saw him a week ago. He used to come up with so he was an engineering background, and his mate from a similar background, similar age, who's since passed away, used to come up with him. They'd come up from Melbourne, and on the property there was an old house that we leased. There was an old house there that we had sort of set aside for visitors to use and for people such as this to use. And so what I'd do is I'd go down and leave one of the unregistered paddock bombs there for them to use, and they would just turn up and avail themselves of the vehicle, and I'd give them a bit of a mud map of where they could go, or where they should go, and where that'd be most useful. Anyway, they turned up, and they picked up the vehicle, which was I used to have a bit of a fondness for the old Subaru four-wheel drive wagons that I could buy for no money, and they were really good on the farm. Anyway, they picked up the Subaru and came up and said g'day, and I told them where to spend some time, and then left them to it. Anyway, and it would have been sort of late, the first week of November in 1999, so about that time. And next morning, I jumped in the ute and went down to say g'day and see how they were going and have a cup of tea with them. And the Subaru was there, but they were gone. And they were going to be there for 3 days. And I knocked and went inside, and they were gone. And they hadn't come back up to the house and said anything and said goodbye, which, you know, they would always do, so they'd just gone. Anyway, I thought, well, they must have got crook or hurt themselves or something wrong. And I went about my business, went about work, and that night, I'm thinking that was a Friday night, and so I think they came up on the Friday, and then on Saturday is when I went down to the house and found that they'd gone. And then I rang my father that night and said, the lights are gone. And anyway, we called the guy Brian, and anyway, I said, because he was Dad's mate, so much older than myself. And anyway, he said they had a fright and they left. So Dad had spoken to Brian, and I said, when you say they had a fright, did they? He said, no, they had something go over the top of them that they couldn't explain. And he said it really shook them up, and they packed up and went home. I left it till the Monday. I left it over the weekend, and I rang Brian, and I said, Dad was saying that you had an incident, and I said, we didn't see you. He explained that they were in the paddock where I'd asked them to be, and they had the moon in front of them, so they're sort of keeping an eye on ducks coming in against the moon, and there's a high-tension power line that runs from east to west, or from west to east, across that part of the paddock, and they were some distance from that. And Brian said that he saw a blue glow coming from the west. So the object was coming from west to east, pretty much in line with the power line, or pretty much over the top of it, but somewhere around the power line. And he just sort of saw this glow and thought that's unusual, and kept doing his job. His mate was to the east of him, so by 100 metres or more, so they were a safe distance apart. Brian said that he'd seen this blue glow coming, and it was travelling slowly, but it was getting bigger. Anyway, he kept looking at it, because he's trying to work out what the hell it was. He said it got increasingly larger, and then against the backdrop of the moon, he could see an unlit fuselage, so a large mass, and at the back of it there was a corresponding glow, which was an orange glow, which wasn't a flame or an exhaust glow. It was just a similar, just a soft glow, the same as the front was blue, and it went across the top of them basically. And I said to Brian, how large was it? And he said it was absolutely enormous. And the guy has always been an engineer and a fitter and turner by well, trade as well as vocation and hobby and everything else. That's his whole life. And so he's very matter-of-fact, very, very mechanical in his mind, a really good thinker. And it went over the top of him, and he sung out to his mate, who was 100 metres or so to the east of him, "Did you see that, or can you see that, or what the hell's that," or something. And the other guy was pretty much in shock, and they jumped into the Subaru and left the paddock at a great rate of knots. And I said to Brian, "What size do you think it was?" And he likened it to significantly larger than a jumbo jet, like the really large size. So hundreds of metres long. Couldn't get any perception of how deep it was or how wide it was across, because he's only sort of looking at one aspect of it. But he judged that it was hundreds of metres across the other axis as well. No, not a rush of wind, not a noise, no mechanical noise, nothing to hear whatsoever, just the vision of the glow, front and rear, and the fact that the centre of it blocked out. You could determine that it had a significant mass in the middle against the moonlight or against the moon. Yeah, and so they left, and I had his mate's phone number, so I left it another couple of days, and I rang his mate to just sort of, and it took a fair bit of cajoling to get him to even talk, but he verified everything that Brian had said, described it exactly the same, and basically said that he didn't want to talk about it, and that they had spent the drive back to Melbourne, so, it's 5.5 hours, trying to come up with theories on what it was, and drew a blank, and yeah, that really did rattle them.
Yeah, that's incredible. Like, there is no words for that type of encounter. The fact that this thing is hundreds of meters long and potentially hundreds of meters wide, this thing is gigantic. I don't blame them for being so terrified. The fact that this thing is moving slowly and quietly and effortlessly above them, that's a terrifying sight.
Yeah, I said, "Did you get any idea of height?" And the response was that he was pretty confident he could have hit it with a shotgun. Probably, it would have been further than that, but the inference was that it was really low. It wasn't something that was a couple of kilometres up in the air. It was something that was really following the ground. So it was close to them, and as I say, it really shook them up. And one of the gentlemen has passed away. The other guy is now aged, but still doing his engineering type things. We had a drought that started early 2000s that went for 9 years, so the rice growing that I was doing sort of came to an end because of lack of water. Those two sightings occurred that were really strong and unexplainable, and witnessed by credible and sensible witnesses.
Yeah, and that's what I love about that, is the fact that this guy is an engineer, and he knows what works, what doesn't work, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And this would have been such a world-breaking moment for someone who thinks like that, who's very methodical, very numbers-driven, and you're seeing something that is just so surreal, something that doesn't make sense. I'm not surprised at all that these guys kind of legged it out of there as quick as they could, if that's the way their mind worked.
Yeah, 100%. And your description is apt. The guy, as I've known him since I was 12, and has been a very mathematical, mechanical, hands-on sort of a fellow. This object went over the top of them, defied all rational explanation. There was nothing propelling it. There was nothing holding it up. There was no noise. It was just a complete enigma.
Yeah, and then the fact that this thing is just so vast in scale would have been the absolute tipping point for this type of encounter, because you would feel so vulnerable out there with only one other person with you. I don't know what was running through their heads, but I would imagine fear is the first thing that really comes to mind.
Yeah, understandably, it was completely out of character for them to leave, and I was quite surprised on the Saturday morning when they'd gone. I had no explanation until I spoke to my father that night and said, you know, what happened to my guests? That's a really, I suppose, you can't mistake it for anything else. The encounter is above and beyond any possible spaced explanation, because you can't have, well, to my knowledge, objects that are that size that basically just slowly glide over the top of you. Noise, you know, no, not even a wind rustle, nothing, just an object going over the top.
Yeah, in regional New South Wales.
Yeah, go figure.
Yeah, it's not like this is a flight range area or anything like that. This is just rural farmland.
Yep, 100%. And I suppose that if its trajectory continued the way it was described, it would have passed south of the Narandra township, heading in an easterly direction, so from west to east. It would have passed south of the township by maybe 3 or 4 k's, I suppose, 5 k's.
Yeah, wow. So there's every chance that it went by a populated area and other people saw something similar.
Look, who would know? All I can do is describe what happened on our ground, you know, on my farm. It could have taken off, you know, at a different trajectory and at a great rate of pace straight after it saw them, or it could have continued doing what it was doing. If it had gone over at speed and height, it wouldn't have upset them as much as the fact that it was low and slow.
It really makes the encounter far more personal, like it was there for them.
Yeah, and so much more unexplainable. Like, I mean, if you've got height and speed, you can sort of, you know, you can think of things that, you know, man-made things that can glide, but not when they're low and slow.
Yeah, exactly. And perspective is so much easier to make out in a night sky when it's closer to you. If it's just bright lights far away, a little bit easier to maybe pass off as something else. And blocking out the moon, that's a whole other story.
Well, it certainly rattled them. And it's something that, you know, again, similar to my brother, hasn't been forgotten. Like, I catch up with these friends of the family periodically, not regularly, because they're on one side of Melbourne, we're at Ballarat, but we do keep in touch. And so it is something that the stories never changed, the descriptions have never changed, the circumstances, everything just has remained as it was all those years ago.
And I know you said earlier there that, you know, the farm kind of become rather drought affected. Did they ever come back to the farm?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I'd have to have a think about that, but I'm pretty sure the answer is no. I think that was the last time.
Yeah, wow. It's interesting when someone gets scared away from their passion so intensely that they do not want to come back. It is rather telling.
Yeah, no, I don't think they did. Admittedly, the availability of irrigation water became more costly, and the gross margin just didn't stack up growing rice, because rice is dependent on quite a volume of water and everything else. The amount that was under rice reduced, and therefore didn't need so much help. I don't think they came back, and there would have been a season or two where they could have, but I think that if I remember correctly, they didn't come back.
Well, John, man, I have to say that property is intense. The fact that you've had these rather incredible encounters over such a short period of time really makes me wonder, like, was there something of interest in that region during that 5-year period? Because these types of encounters, they're so few and far between, and the fact that you kind of had 2 in a very similar area is rather mind-blowing.
Yeah, I don't have an explanation. The only thing that I could add is that the first sighting was on a similar path, like east-west to the second one, admittedly years apart, but they were similar. So where Brett was on that particular property was directly west of where Brian and that were. Not that I think that is relevant, but that's just where the crops were. Interesting for sure. Explanation for someone else, I have no idea.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Believe Paranormal and UFO podcast. If you have had an encounter and you would like to share it, please get in touch with me. My email address is believepod@gmail.com. Finally, don't forget to follow us on all our social media outlets and be sure to join our Discord server to talk to other listeners of the show. You'll find all these links in our show notes. Thank you.